On December 8, 1980, former member of the Beatles and musician John Lennon was shot to death by a crazy fan. Hello everyone. Welcome to True Crime. I would appreciate it if you can subscribe, like and comment. Today we are going to be talking about famous artist John Lennon. A death that shocked fans all around the world. John Winston Lennon was born on October 9, 1940, in Liverpool, England, during a German air raid in World War II. His parents, Julia Stanley and Alfred Lennon, had a tumultuous relationship. Alfred, a merchant seaman, was often absent, leading to their separation. Young John primarily lived with his Aunt Mimi Smith and Uncle George at their home, Mendips, while maintaining a close but complex relationship with his mother, Julia. Despite the separation, Julia introduced him to music, teaching him to play the banjo and encouraging his interest in rock and roll. Tragically, Julia died in a car accident when John was 17, a loss that deeply impacted him throughout his life. Lennon attended Quarry Bank High School, where his rebellious nature often led to disciplinary issues. Despite his lack of academic interest, he showed a talent for art and writing. The Beatles' origins trace back to Liverpool in 1957, when a 16-year-old John Lennon formed a skiffle group called the Quarrymen. Paul McCartney joined later that year, followed by George Harrison in early 1958. The group went through several name changes and personnel before settling on the Beatles in 1960. They played residencies in Hamburg, Germany, from 1960 to 1962, honing their musical skills and developing a reputation for energetic performances. During this period, drummer Pete Best was replaced by Ringo Starr in 1962. The band's big break came in 1962 when they signed with manager Brian Epstein and secured a recording contract with EMI's Parlophone label under producer George Martin. Their first single, Love Me Do, was released in October 1962 and reached number 17 on the UK charts. However, it was their second single, Please Please Me, 1963, that catapulted them to fame in the UK. The subsequent debut album, also titled Please Please Me, dominated the British charts for 30 weeks. The term Beatlemania was coined in 1963 to describe the intense fan frenzy surrounding the band. Their 1964 appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show marked their breakthrough in the United States, drawing an audience of 73 million. Singles like I Want to Hold Your Hand topped international charts, and their film A Hard Day's Night, 1964, expanded their popularity. By 1965, the Beatles had conquered global markets with albums such as Help, and singles like Yesterday and Ticket to Ride. As their popularity grew, so did their musical sophistication. Albums like Rubber Soul, 1965, and Revolver, 1966, showcased more complex lyrics and innovative production techniques. In 1967, they released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, widely regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time, marking a peak in their artistic evolution. This period also saw them embrace Eastern philosophy and culture, influenced by their meeting with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Despite their success, tensions within the band began to rise. The ambitious White Album, 1968, reflected the members' diverging artistic interests. The Let It Be sessions, 1969, were marked by discord, though they later recorded Abbey Road, often considered their swan song. The Beatles formally broke up in 1970, with each member pursuing solo careers. John Lennon's solo career and activism were deeply intertwined, marking him as both a prolific artist and a dedicated social advocate. After the Beatles disbanded in 1970, Lennon's solo music reflected his evolving personal and political perspectives. His first post-Beatles album, Plastic Ono Band, 1970, explored themes of vulnerability, pain, and self-reflection, driven by his experience with primal therapy. Songs like Mother and Working Class Hero addressed his childhood trauma and social issues. The follow-up album, Imagine, 1971, became his most iconic solo work, with the title track becoming an anthem for peace and hope. The song, with its utopian vision, aligned with Lennon's broader activist efforts, including his outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War and his criticism of political corruption. His activism extended beyond music. In 1969, Lennon and Yoko Ono staged bed-ins for peace in Amsterdam and Montreal, turning their honeymoon into a media-covered event to promote nonviolence. During the Montreal bed-in, they recorded Give Peace a Chance, which quickly became a rallying cry for the anti-war movement. Lennon and Ono's activism drew the attention of the U.S. government, especially after they moved to New York City in 1971. Their association with anti-war radicals and support for causes like the John Sinclair case made Lennon a target of the Nixon administration. The FBI closely monitored him, fearing his influence on young, politically active Americans. Despite threats of deportation, Lennon continued his advocacy, participating in benefit concerts and speaking out against injustices worldwide. After a turbulent mid-1970s, John Lennon entered a 5-year hiatus from music in 1975 to focus on family life. He and Yoko Ono had welcomed their son, Sean, that October, and Lennon embraced his role as a house husband while Ono managed their business affairs. This period was marked by Lennon's dedication to domesticity. He cooked, cared for Sean, and relished a more private existence in New York City. This sabbatical allowed him to reconnect with himself and his family, largely away from the public eye. In 1980, a pivotal event rekindled Lennon's musical inspiration. While vacationing in Bermuda with Sean, he heard the B-52's Rock Lobster, which reminded him of Yoko's experimental music and motivated him to return to the studio. Over long-distance calls, he and Ono began writing songs that would form the basis of their collaborative album Double Fantasy. Recorded in secret with producer Jack Douglas, Double Fantasy was released in November 1980. The album alternates between Lennon's reflective, melodic rock songs and Ono's more avant-garde pieces. Tracks like Just Like, Starting Over, Woman, and Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy expressed themes of renewal, love, and fatherhood, mirroring his personal journey. The album initially received mixed reviews, but Lennon's tragic death would later cast it in a new light. On December 8, 1980, John Lennon's final day unfolded in a series of ordinary events that tragically ended in his assassination. In the morning, Lennon and Yoko Ono were at their Dakota apartment in New York City. Annie Leibovitz visited to photograph them for Rolling Stone magazine, capturing the famous image of Lennon nude, embracing Ono. This was to be Lennon's final professional photo shoot. At around 2 p.m., he gave what would be his last interview to Dave Sholin from San Francisco's RKO radio network. During the interview, Lennon spoke optimistically about the future and his new music. Later that afternoon, Lennon and Ono left for the record plant studio to continue working on her song Walking on Thin Ice, featuring Lennon on guitar. At around 5 p.m., as they exited the Dakota, Mark David Chapman, a fan who had been waiting outside all day, asked Lennon for an autograph on his Double Fantasy album. Lennon obliged, and a photo was taken by fan Paul Gorish, capturing the moment. At approximately 10:50 p.m., after returning from the studio, Lennon and Ono exited their limousine and walked towards the entrance of the Dakota. Chapman, still waiting nearby, drew a .38 caliber revolver and fired 5 shots at Lennon from close range, hitting him 4 times. Lennon staggered into the building's vestibule before collapsing. The building's doorman, Jose Perdomo, disarmed Chapman, who remained at the scene, calmly reading a copy of The Catcher in the Rye until police arrived. Officers rushed Lennon to Roosevelt Hospital, but he was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. Yoko Ono, in shock, stayed at the hospital while officials informed the media. Mark David Chapman was born on May 10, 1955, in Fort Worth, Texas, and grew up in a troubled household. His father, a U.S. Air Force sergeant, was reportedly abusive, while his mother worked as a nurse. Chapman felt alienated from an early age, creating imaginary friends and developing a fascination with control over them. In high school, he struggled socially and academically, leading to drug use and a brief period of homelessness. However, after a profound religious experience, Chapman became a born-again Christian and worked at a YMCA, eventually traveling extensively, including volunteering in a Vietnamese refugee camp. Chapman's motive stemmed from a complex blend of psychological issues, resentment, and obsession. Once a Beatles fan, he became disillusioned after reading Anthony Fawcett's biography of John Lennon, where he saw the musician's affluent lifestyle as hypocritical compared to his message of peace and simplicity. Chapman also fixated on J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, identifying deeply with the protagonist Holden Caulfield's disdain for phoniness and projecting this onto Lennon. He believed killing Lennon would elevate him to fame and align with a twisted sense of destiny or higher purpose, even stating he heard voices encouraging him to commit the act. Mark David Chapman's trial for the murder of John Lennon was unusual and controversial. Following his arrest on December 8, 1980, Chapman was charged with second-degree murder. Initially, his defense attorney, Jonathan Marks, sought to build an insanity defense. However, Chapman unexpectedly pleaded guilty on June 22, 1981, against his legal team's advice, claiming he was following the will of God and believed his actions had a divine purpose. During the trial, defense attorneys argued that Chapman's actions were those of a delusional individual. They emphasized his long-standing mental health struggles, pointing to his obsession with J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, which Chapman often cited as an influence. He saw himself in the novel's protagonist, Holden Caulfield, who symbolized innocence and moral purity. His mental health struggles and prior suicide attempt were noted but did not sway the court's decision. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Alan Sullivan, emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime. Sullivan highlighted Chapman's calm demeanor and detailed planning, including using hollow-point bullets specifically to ensure Lennon's death. The prosecution argued this demonstrated rationality and intent, countering claims of insanity. At the sentencing hearing on August 24, 1981, Chapman read a passage from The Catcher in the Rye. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Since then, Chapman's parole requests have repeatedly been denied. During his imprisonment, he has expressed regret for his actions. John Lennon's death on December 8, 1980, sent shockwaves worldwide. That night, Yoko Ono, visibly distraught, was by Lennon's side at Roosevelt Hospital as he was pronounced dead. Upon receiving the news, his fellow former Beatles were devastated. George Harrison expressed sorrow about the violent nature of his friend's death, while Paul McCartney, though criticized for initially saying, "It's a drag," later clarified he was too shocked to articulate his emotions properly. Ringo Starr rushed to comfort Ono and Lennon's son, Sean, in New York. Fans gathered spontaneously at the Dakota Building, leaving flowers and candles. Ono requested that instead of a formal funeral, people honor John with moments of silence. On December 14, millions paused for 10 minutes of silence worldwide, including 30,000 in Liverpool and over 225,000 in New York's Central Park. During this period, all NYC radio stations went silent in tribute. In the weeks following, Lennon's music topped global charts. Just Like Starting Over and the Double Fantasy album, released shortly before his death, reached #1 in the US and UK. His earlier singles, such as Imagine, also saw renewed popularity. Tributes poured in from musicians like Queen, who performed Imagine live, and George Harrison, who released All Those Years Ago with contributions from Paul and Ringo. John Lennon's assassination marked a turning point in the music industry, prompting increased security for celebrities. His death remains symbolic of lost idealism for many who saw him as a champion of peace and social justice. In later years, Ono dedicated resources to preserving Lennon's legacy through projects like the Strawberry Fields Memorial in Central Park. Thank you all for watching this. I would appreciate it if you can subscribe, like, comment, and tell your other friends to come on and join the True Crimers. Thank you all.